Let's talk about God's will. So, there's one important distinction we need to make when talking about God's will. One very, very important distinction we have to make. And that's between God's perfect will, which is what God actually wills to happen, what his desires are to happen, and his permissive will, which is things that he allows to happen. So I can't explain how harmful it is to look at a bad situation and say, "Oh, it's God's will." No, it is not. Okay, we need to stop saying that whenever something bad happens or something inconvenient happens, saying that that is God's will. Okay, in some cases, yes. Some cases it is God's will. But if it's something like someone dying because they got in a car accident, that is not a part of God's perfect will. Somebody commits suicide, that is not a part of God's perfect will. Somebody who is sinning, those sins are not a part of God's perfect will. Okay, because God does not will any kind of evil. He does not will that people would sin. But what does he do? Look at the garden. Did he stop Adam and Eve? No. He allowed what happened to happen. Because don't forget, it's not just like God and Adam and Eve. We're still talking about God here. Like God can do literally anything. But he allows Adam and Eve to sin. That is his permissive will. He is allowing for that to happen, but he does not want that to happen. He will allow for you to sin. He will allow for you to fall under the same sin over and over again, but that is not what he wants for you. He will use that to make you a better person, to help you grow as an individual, but he does not want for you to sin, right? And when we just look at something evil happening and saying, "Oh, that's God's will," like, or something happened that must be God's will. No. God does not will that someone who is under stress and anxiety commits suicide. Or if there's like a miscarriage or something like that. God does not want dead babies. Right? That is not a part of God's perfect will. But he allows those things to happen. Why? I don't know. I don't know why God doesn't just stop some of the things. Other than the fact that he gave us free will. That is somehow in God's mind, in the mystery of his understanding and knowledge of everything. He knows that man having free will and the choice to choose evil, and knowing that someone would choose evil but still allowing them to do that, he knows that at the end, when everything's all said and done, it was better for that to have happened, for all of those sins to have happened, than if he had not given people free will to do what they want. Because imagine, if we don't have free will, if we don't have a choice to love God, then we're not really loving God, we're just slaves. And God doesn't want a bunch of slaves. God wants a bunch of people, individual people who are all distinct and different from each other, to love him, to choose him freely. And part of that is to choose. Actually, everything of that is to choose. If we were forced to always choose good, then we don't really have a choice, do we? If I don't have the choice to love and serve God, then I'm not really loving and serving God out of love. I'm doing it because that's what I have to do. And God doesn't will for that to happen. Somehow God looked at everything and he said, you know what? It would be better if people had free will, if they had their choice, if they were allowed to do silly things. And just think of some like silly sins or something that you have gotten over in your life. How have those helped you grow as a person? I used to lie a lot. And I mean, sometimes I still do lie, but like not as bad. Like I would lie to my parents because I just didn't want to face the facts of what they wanted to, or face the facts, pretty much. You know, as a kid, you don't want to suffer consequences or whatever. And that really put a strain on my relationship with my parents because I'm lying to them, right? And after becoming more honest with them, becoming more vulnerable with my parents, we've grown in a relationship together. I've grown in my ability to talk to them. I mean, it's still hard. It's still really hard. There's a lot of times where I won't tell my parents something. I won't lie to them. I will just leave stuff out. Or if they ask me about it, I'll still tell them. But I just won't tell them about everything in my day or whatever. And simple little things like that build up over time. God will allow for me to not be perfect, to keep working on it, to keep striving. And he won't just make me better. No matter how much I ask, it's a process. God wants us to grow as people. And how do we grow? We don't just grow when everything's easy and fine. We grow through adversity. God wills that in us. He wills us to grow. That is part of his perfect will. He wants us to grow to be closer to him. And yes, on the way, we won't do everything that he wants us to. We won't live absolutely perfect lives. And he'll allow that. And he'll work with us where we're at. We have a good God. We have a loving God who understands, because he was one of us. He knows what we're going through. We have a God who's been in our shoes, and not many other religions can say that, you know? But we have a God who will meet us where we're at. We have a God where if we sin, if we fail at one point, he doesn't just give up on us. It's not just game over. He will allow us to fail. He will allow us to stumble. Because in the end, it's better, apparently. And I don't know, I'm not dead. I can't see God's will. I probably know less of God's will than I should, or at least my part. But any parent who just does everything for their kids, like a Zamboni parent or a helicopter parent who will go before the kids to make sure that all the ice is clear and that there's no paths in the way, or that all the trees are navigable and they have a perfect path or whatever. That's not helping their kids grow, really. Not in the way that God does. God will do that. God absolutely does that. Our lives could be so much worse all of the time. There is so much that could go wrong at any point of the day. And God knows that, and God gave us our guardian angels to protect us, to watch over us so those things don't happen. But God will let us struggle because, like any good parent, your kids don't learn to walk just by, oh, they're just going to do it one day, by you just showing them how to do it. No, you have to help them, but then eventually they have to do it themselves. If you never stopped helping your kids walk and they needed you to be with them the whole time, your kids can't really walk. We are so blessed to have a God who loves us enough to let us fail, to let us stumble. And then after we do, to not just say, oh, well, that's too bad you didn't make it, see you later. But one who will stoop back down to pick us up and brush the dirt off our shoulders and then put us back on our feet and let us go. We are so lucky to have a God who loves us in that way. I love you all.